back to our channel, Elementary, my dear,
where we make nutrition science easy for you to digest.
Today we're talking about what to eat for a healthy gut.
Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss one of our videos.
So in our last video, we went into a lot of detail about how our gut microbiome might be affecting our body weight and risk for obesity. Part of that conversation was really highlighting the fact that a lot of the variables that affect our gut microbiome aren't really in our control. Things like exposure to antibiotics when you're still in the womb,
How you were born,
whether you're breastfed or not,
your environment.
variables like diet and physical activity, which arguably are, at least to a certain extent, more within our control, also can affect our gut microbiome.
Which is really good news because in addition to playing a factor in your risk of obesity, your gut microbiome, we're learning more and more, has an impact on just about every aspect of your health. With that being said though, our actual understanding and grasp of the gut microbiome is very preliminary right now. It's only been the last 2 decades or so that we've even been studying this. While we do have some ideas on what makes a healthy gut microbiome, there's still a lot of really big question marks when it comes to the science.
Based on our very preliminary understanding, there are some features of the microbiome that are considered better or healthier, one of which is diversity. So essentially having an abundance and more types of microorganisms in your gut is considered beneficial.
Additionally, there is some evidence that shows that certain ratios of some types of bacteria to other types are associated with different disease states. But what's interesting with this is some ratios are positive for some disease states, but actually end up being negative for other ones. For example, firmicutes and bacteroidetes make up about 90% of the phyla of the bacteria that are hanging out in your gut. That ratio has been studied a lot just because they are in such abundance in your gut. Having a high ratio of firmicutes to bacteroidetes increases your risk of obesity. However, low firmicutes to bacteroidetes ratio increases your risk of diabetes. That's not saying that because you have these ratios, you will end up with these diseases. It's just that there is some kind of relationship.
Another potential feature of a healthy gut is having bacteria that can produce short-chain fatty acids. Essentially, when undigested food gets to the end of our digestive tract, these bacteria can break that down and produce short-chain fatty acids. And there are certain short-chain fatty acids that can get absorbed into our bodies and promote metabolic health.
That's where a lot of the science is right now, is just trying to figure out which are the good bacteria, how do they impact health, and how do all of the different bacteria that hang out together impact your health.
So now let's talk about what types of dietary components might have an effect on that. Specifically, let's talk about the 3 main macronutrients: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Shall we start with protein?
Let's start with protein.
Early research suggests that certain types of protein may be beneficial for a gut microbiome. For example, there was research done using a simulator of the human intestinal microbiome ecosystem, or SHIME. They used whey supplementation and they found that it actually increased the growth of good bacteria called bifidobacteria and reduced abundance of some bad bacteria, including Clostridium perfringens.
Similarly, in another in vitro trial where they took human bacteria and tried to simulate that ecosystem once again, when they gave them pea protein, they found increases in good bacteria and then decreases in bad bacteria. And in addition, they found increases in the amount of butyrate, which is one of those short chain fatty acids that we were talking about earlier that's associated with beneficial health outcomes.
Now you might hear that and think, okay, so more protein, the better. Not so fast. There is very limited research on high protein diets, and the research that does exist seems to be mixed. Some research suggests that high protein diets, if there's no impact on calorie intake or fiber intake, may have pretty limited effects on our gut microbiome, and any effect that is there might be transient.
However, there is a lot of concern among scientists in this area about really high protein diets, and that's diets where more than 30% of the energy comes from protein, and the effect that that could have on the gut microbiome, specifically because a lot of the products that bacteria make from excess amino acids are associated with negative health impacts. So we talked about short chain fatty acids and how those are generally good, but some of these short chain fatty acids that are made from amino acids actually have a negative impact when they study them in vitro and when they look at how it impacts the cells of the colon.
So what's the takeaway? Well, we don't really know. Ultimately, protein is a very important macronutrient and should be a part of a well-rounded diet anyway, but that doesn't mean that you should be exceeding. Going over that 30% mark might actually have some downsides. Now let's talk about dietary fat. Turns out that the amount and types of fat that you consume does have an effect on our microbiome. There's one experiment done with 88 individuals that were at higher risk for metabolic syndrome. Essentially, they were started off with everyone being on a high-fat diet for 4 weeks, and then they were all randomized into different groups. Turns out that those that were randomized into the low-fat diet groups, the abundance of the good bacteria in their gut actually went up, and we saw improvements in markers of blood glucose and cholesterol. So essentially their glucose levels went down and the cholesterol levels also went down. Conversely, those that were in the high-fat diet groups, the specific type of bacteria that went up that's associated with Crohn's disease, asthma, depression, and obesity. And then those that were on the high monounsaturated fat group actually found that there wasn't that much of a difference on the microbiome. The relative ratios of the different bacteria didn't change, although overall bacterial count did seem to go down, but there were also improvements in some of their cholesterol markers. All in all, to say that, some of the changes may have been through the gut microbiome and some of them may not have been related to the gut microbiome at all.
I think what's really interesting as well with this, when we're actually looking at the evidence around the bacteria, some of them are good for some things and make other things worse. So it does really make it hard to understand what the recommendation should be based on this information. Interestingly, in a study in mice, they took some mice and they fed one group of mice a high-fat diet, mostly from lard. The other group of mice, they got their fat mostly from fish. In the mice that were fed mostly their fat from lard, we saw an increase in the bacteroids and bilophila types of bacteria. Alongside those changes, there was increase in inflammation, worsening of blood glucose control, and increases in their immune activation, which is very interesting because a lot of the chronic diseases that we talk about, like diabetes, cancers, Alzheimer's, are associated with increased activations of the immune system as well as inflammation. Conversely, the fish fat fed mice had increases in other bacteria, including the lactic acid bacteria that are typically seen to be beneficial. What's the most interesting part of this is they cleared out the guts of the mice and they took some of the poop from the fish-fed mice and they put them into the lard-fed mice, and they did the other way around where they took the lard poop and put it into the fish mice. And they actually saw changes in their metabolic health and levels of inflammation that mirrored what was happening for the mouse from which they got the poop, which really shows that changes to inflammation and metabolism may actually be mediated through the gut microbiome and can be influenced by diet, which is really interesting because we've known for a long time, generally the fat from fish is healthy, omega-3s, they're good for you, anti-inflammatory, but one of the mechanisms by which that happens could be through the gut microbiome.
Last but certainly not least, let's talk about carbohydrates. So now when it comes to digestible carbohydrates, so the carbohydrates that you eat that your body can actually break down and absorb and use for energy, there isn't that much research on that type of food's effect on our gut microbiome, but there's a lot of research on the non-digestible carbohydrates that we eat, things like fiber. Research consistently shows that diets that are low in fiber are associated with very low diversity in the gut microbiome, as well as lower levels of butyrate producing bacteria.
And again, butyrate is one of those short-chain fatty acids. It's probably the most well-studied short-chain fatty acid and the one that's most consistently pointed to when we're looking at health benefits.
Conversely, diets that are high in fiber have been shown to increase abundance of lactobacillus bacteria as well as bifidobacteria, both of which are associated with positive health outcomes. Turns out it's not just the absolute amount of fiber that you consume, but also the diversity of fiber that you consume.
A study of 10,000 people, mostly from the US and the UK, found that people who eat more than 30 different types of plant foods per week had a better diversity of gut microbiome than those who had less than 10. And this was regardless of the fact of whether they were vegetarians, vegans, or omnivores.
And when we say plants, we of course mean fruits and vegetables, but this also includes grains and legumes.
I'd say the bulk of the research and the bulk of the evidence around how we can use diet to improve gut health is in the area of non-digestible carbohydrates, aka fiber.
Having said all that, what is our takeaway? As you can probably tell, there isn't a whole lot of evidence yet to provide concrete recommendations, but the bulk of the evidence does seem to support that having a wide and varied diet that does prioritize a variety of plant foods seem to be the most beneficial in supporting our gut health.
And honestly, this isn't really anything revolutionary, because I think when we look at the literature, that's kind of just the
Consistent
thing for good health in general. But I think this really points out that this may be one of the mechanisms by which we see the benefits of having a diverse diet with a diverse amount of plant foods in it.
The more reason to eat the rainbow. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a video, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.